I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by this news story, but we have to talk about it. Al Jazeera in Israel is essentially done. They got the boot. According to the Prime Minister of Israel and the government of Israel, they have now put into law that Al Jazeera needs to cease operations. I'm going to play these clips and then we'll get into what exactly is happening.
דיון בקבינט המדיני-ביטחוני ובהמשך להנחייתי, הממשלה תדון היום בסגירת שידורי אל ג'זירה בישראל. כתבי אל ג'זירה פגעו בביטחון ישראל והסיתו נגד חיילי צה"ל. הגיע הזמן לסלק את השופר של חמאס מהמדינה שלנו.
הממשלה אישרה עכשיו פה אחד את סגירת שופר ההסתה של החמאס בישראל, הערוץ של ג'זירה. הצווים נחתמו הרגע, אנחנו מוציאים אותם לפועל. שופר של החמאס, מי שמסית נגד מדינת ישראל, מי שפוגע בביטחון ישראל ובחיילי ולוחמי צה"ל.
Okay, so I found it interesting that Israel keeps referring to Al Jazeera as the mouthpiece of Hamas. I hope I can still say that on this platform. I haven't been on here in a while. Again, that is the narrative that Israel is portraying. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, Al Jazeera definitely does report on the quote-unquote other side, if you will. In fact, as somebody who likes to report news and go through open source information, especially whenever you look into Al Jazeera, you do have to be a little careful. I will be 100% honest. A lot of times they will give one side of the story and a little bit of the other side. So Al Jazeera is a decent source to get one side of a story. That's just my opinion. You guys can let me know what you think down in the comments about Al Jazeera. But again, you should definitely not be surprised that Al Jazeera is getting the boot from Israel. Because again, Israel is saying that it's starting to become a security concern. Now, I'm going to be honest, when I was looking into what exactly the security concern was, I couldn't find any specific references or evidence that Israel was saying. Again, they just kept referring to Al Jazeera as the mouthpiece to Hamas. Now, within like hours of this law going into practice, Israel is already raiding Al Jazeera offices. Well, an office in Jerusalem. Apparently, Al Jazeera had an office in a hotel in Jerusalem, and Israeli police officers started to dismantle the entire office, the hotel room, if you will. Essentially taking apart the cameras, taking all the documents, things like this. So Israel is extremely serious about this. Now, another key component about this story is that Israel, though, they haven't really mentioned about operations in the West Bank and over in Gaza or Palestine. I think this is extremely crucial because this is where, Al Jazeera is getting most of their information. So it's rather interesting that they can operate in those territories, but they cannot operate within Israel. So again, this is a rather gray area or a law for Israel. It doesn't look like this is actually going to be indefinitely. I'm seeing reports of 45 days, and I'm seeing reports of Israel will just shut down Al Jazeera operations as long as this war continues, which this war is probably going to continue for a while now, considering at the time of making this video, the peace agreements and ceasefire agreements are not looking great. So again, whenever military start to take down news organizations or media organizations, it definitely looks a little shady, regardless of what side you are on. I'm going to be super transparent. I'm on the side of peace in the Middle East. We should all cut this out right now. But again, it's definitely a little shady when you start to dismantle or take down news organizations. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of Al Jazeera. I'm just going to be plainly honest with you, only because it gets a little too biased on certain sides, so it's hard for me to even trust the entirety of the organization and actually give you guys some accurate news. But again, Israel is saying this is a security concern. To me, what it appears as, and what I'm seeing on a lot of open forums and open source again, it does look like Israel just does not like how Al Jazeera is reporting the war or how they are deciphering the information and putting it out to the public. Because again, Al Jazeera is really popular, not only around the world, but definitely in the Middle East. And Al Jazeera also has direct ties to certain organizations whose name you can't say on here. They managed to get interviews, they managed to get direct quotes, and they put it out to the public. So again, Israel does not like that a news organization has direct access to the adversaries of Israel. Meanwhile, Israel is at war with the guys that Al Jazeera is somehow talking to. So you can see how it's a little problematic, but you can also see on the other side, it definitely looks like either Israel is trying to control some sort of narrative, or Israel is just sick and tired of how the reporters are doing their jobs over at Al Jazeera. Now, coming from the Al Jazeera side, obviously they're extremely annoyed and very pissed off about this. They're saying that everything Israel is saying about Al Jazeera being a security risk is an all-out lie. Again, I'm just here to report the news. I'll leave it up to you guys what you think about Al Jazeera and how Israel is handling this entire situation. But again, Al Jazeera is taking the defensive stance and saying they have nothing to do with what Israel is saying. They're just simply reporting the news. And again, coming from the Israeli side, you can see why they're not fans of Al Jazeera if Al Jazeera is completely, reporting either one side of the story or not the fullness of a story. So again, but I'm going to be honest, even on the Israeli side, like the Israeli Times, they seem to do the same thing as well. So I'm not really here to take a stance. I'm more here just to decipher the news and break it down for you guys. And then in the comments, you can leave your own opinion on Al Jazeera. But again, main point of this part of the video is that Al Jazeera is extremely pissed off about all of this, and they're denying all allegations. In fact, they could even have the opportunity to take this into courts with Israel, because look, I'm not seeing enough evidence of what Israel is saying. They haven't really put that out in the public other than these direct quotations and the ability to have, interviews with the adversaries of Israel. Now, the last thing I want to put out is that this all seems to be lining up in the perfect moment where Israel is under a lot of pressure either for humanitarian aid or going into southern Gaza. Again, I'm just putting it out there. That's how it appears from the outside, and we just have to speak the truth. If Israel wants to go into southern Gaza and they know that there's one news organization who's really hammering it down and really critical of Israeli defense forces, among other news organizations, but Al Jazeera is like on the front lines. They're there. I mean, they've lost news reporters on the front lines. And so it's sort of starting to line up that Israel is like, you know what, let's get rid of the news organization that's really criticizing us as we start to ramp up operations for the potential of going into southern Gaza. Obviously, no one wants southern Gaza to be invaded. I don't even think Israel wants this to go down, but it looks like, again, I'm just saying what it appears as, get rid of Al Jazeera so we can continue our operations. So I'm just trying to report the news to you guys as unbiased as possible. I'm sure a lot of you are not going to appreciate my comments on whatever side you are, but again, I'm just going to be super transparent. I'm not the biggest fan of Al Jazeera, but I'm also not the biggest fan of censorship. Being an American, there's a very fine line between what's the truth and not the truth, and hopefully we are intelligent enough to actually decipher the information and go through all the open sources, all the media to see what's true and not true. I've just never really had that great of experiences with Al Jazeera as far as reporting the fullness of stories, and again, Israel is calling it a security risk. I really do want to see that evidence, and I hope it does get put out there at what exactly they're citing or referencing. But again, we'll see what happens. This is the full story. You have an Al Jazeera office being shut down and raided in Jerusalem, and it looks like Al Jazeera operations are completely done with for now. Sorry, there is one more thing I want to say if you are still watching this video. One thing that I didn't really harp on or really forgot to mention is that Al Jazeera really has been reporting the entirety of this conflict, literally 24/7, like every single minute of the conflict. Again, whether or not you agree with Al Jazeera, I do think it's important to put that out there. So you have to assume there's actually a lot of Israelis or people living inside of Israel, if you will, who probably or maybe heavily rely on Al Jazeera. So you can see how now all of a sudden a narrative can completely change if that's your number one news source and all of a sudden it's gone. Imagine in America if all of a sudden we got rid of Fox News because of how they're reporting on the border down in Texas. I mean, you can imagine a lot of our grandparents over on Facebook, they're going to have a massive issue. So again, this is more so, this is a very complex issue, if you will. I just wanted to put that out there and really harp on the fact that Al Jazeera really has an important voice to this conflict, and Israel just doesn't really seem to either agree with it or they really have some sort of evidence that it's a big security risk. But I can only imagine the amount of people in Israel who now all of a sudden just lost their news source. Now, I have been seeing some reports, and the reason why I'm still making this video, that you still do have access as far as a web browser to find Al Jazeera sources, but as far as local TV stations, they've gone totally blackout. You're not able to actually watch Al Jazeera. I'm going to be honest with you, I've never been in that part of the country, so I'm not quite sure how it works with flipping through your news channels and where they're all at. Obviously, in America, you're going to have your Fox News, CNN, ABC, and stuff like that. I'm not sure how it is over in Israel, but again, the reports are saying all over the internet and open source that there is a blackout on TV, but you can go on social media and the internet to find Al Jazeera news. So again, I do think this heavily affects civilians within Israel now that there seems to be a narrative missing from this operation and campaign. But Israel is pretty serious about getting rid of Al Jazeera.